Well, good morning, everyone. So great to be with you this morning, and welcome to Redeemer. A special welcome to you. If you are a first-time guest, we are so glad you're here, and we're looking forward to getting to know you as you get to know us a little bit better. But if this is your first time, or maybe the first time in a while, you are stepping into the second week of a sermon series called Dress for Success, where we have been talking about Ephesians 6, specifically the armor of God. Now, I do have to tell you something about this series because it's a little bit different than series we've done in the past. Because in the past, we do series, but typically you can kind of jump in and you can experience just one, and that's good enough, right? You don't really miss all that much, even though there's a lot of good stuff there, but they can kind of stand on their own 2 feet. This one is not like that, right? This one is building on itself, and to really get the full weight and the full value of what we're doing, I'm gonna ask you to commit to either being here or watching online, because I don't want you to miss a second, which means even if you're joining us for the first time and you missed last week, I want you to maybe spend some time this afternoon or sometime this week, go back and listen to that first service, because I think there's really something here that every one of us can use in our life to find success in not only this life, but the next, and I would hate for you to miss out. So when you're doing the summer thing, I get it, going to the cabin, going on that last second trip, make sure that you tune in and get connected. But let me give you a quick recap. Because like I said, this is building on each other, and so I'd hate for some of you to think, I have no idea what's going on, how do we get here? So here's the big takeaway from last week. We talked about to win the battle, you need to know who the enemy is, which makes sense, right? What if you're going to battle and you don't know who your enemy is? If that's the case, you might attack an innocent person. You might attack somebody and they aren't, right? They aren't the enemy, and all of a sudden, guess what happens? You start a war with a different group of people. Or maybe you actually do the work of the enemy, right? They're planning on attacking that person, but now they don't have to because you're doing it. Or maybe when you're so focused on that person that you think they're the enemy, that is where the enemy is, well, you open yourself up to attack from a different direction. So who is that enemy? That's what we talked about last week. Now, as we look at Ephesians 6, there's something interesting in that, is that before it talks about who the enemy is, it actually spends a lot of time talking about who the enemy isn't. And I think that's fascinating. I think there's a purpose that Paul does that, because so much in our life, we look at that person next to us, that neighbor, that boss, that person in our life that's just causing us distress, and we think, they are the enemy. But Paul is very clear, that's not the enemy. If there's a heart beating in their chest, they are not the enemy. In fact, as we read through it, we learned very quickly that if they have a heart beating in their chest, they're not the enemy, they're actually a victim. Because the real enemy is the person who attacks every single human, which is sin, and it's Satan. So this week, we're moving on. Now that we know who the enemy is, we have to ask ourselves, what do we need to do to protect ourselves? Because if you know the enemy, you can learn their strategies, you can learn their techniques, and you can defend against them. Now, if you were here last week, you know that I told this story about church league softball and how I was trying to impress this girl. Spoiler alert, that girl did become my wife, so I must have done pretty well. But this is what really the core of the story is. I said, I went to play softball, but I didn't have all my equipment. The key part I was missing was my cleats. So I was running, I fell down, I tore up my knee, it was embarrassing, it was painful, all of those things. But you would think that after experiencing that I would have learned my lesson. In fact, you would think that after spending a Sunday telling that story over and over and over again, that I would never do that again. But last Sunday, almost immediately after telling that story, I went to play pickleball. I had some family in town. I had the in-laws and Ashley's grandparents, which is my wife, by the way. And so we're going to play pickleball, and I'm ready. I got my socks. I've got my shorts. I've got a t-shirt. I've got a hat. I got my paddle, and I'm putting all this stuff on. And all of a sudden I realized I don't have any shoes, which means all I had was my dress shoes that I was wearing at church for speaking in front of all of you guys. So I thought, no big deal. I'll just go, I'll enjoy the picnic, and it really won't be that big deal. So I make my way over there, and all of a sudden, it's not just my family. There's a bunch of people from Redeemer playing pickleball. And so they recognize me, like, hey, come play with us. And I was like, what are you gonna do? I gotta play. But all I have is my dress shoes. And so I think, no big deal. I'll just lace them up really tight and I'll go play. And the result was okay, right? There was underperformance, but ultimately the real issue was it caused a lot of pain. Towards the end, my Achilles was hurting. This whole past week, my knees have been hurting. And when I got home, I looked at my shoes and they are destroyed because they were not made for playing pickleball in. So then I had to buy a whole new pair of shoes. It was a whole thing. But today we're gonna talk about wearing the proper equipment. Because if you want to battle against the enemy, you have to be wearing the right things. This is how Paul said it. In Ephesians 6:13, he says, therefore, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes. Here's the thing I want you to grab from this. Success requires preparation, right? And you know this, because in life, isn't this true, right? When you're prepared, when you see something on the horizon, we know that trip is coming, you can do all the things and you can be ready and then you find success. But when life happens and you're not ready, when you're not prepared, maybe you even see it on the horizon, but you think, I'll just deal with this some other day, and all of a sudden it's there, it's in your face. You tend to fail. Right? When something surprises you, you tend to fail because you are not ready, you are not prepared. And what does Paul say? What does Paul say about when should you be ready? When should you be ready for the battle? Before the battle begins. Imagine this, you're at war. Now, I know this is hard for us to understand because as a nation, we haven't had battles in our country for hundreds of years. But let's imagine that there's a war going on inside our country, right? There's a foreign invader and you are in the military. So for some of you, that means, well, I'm too old. Well, we're all 25 in this story, right? We're all 25 years old. We're at our peak physical condition. So some of you guys are younger, some of you guys are older, but just imagine you're at your peak physical condition. You have been trained, you are ready for a battle, you know all the things. But the battle's been going on for years. And so you're kind of over it, right? And you're sitting in your site with all of your buddies and you think, I just need some me time. So you go into your bunker and you put on some shorts, you put on a tank top, you put on your aviator sunglasses, you put on your Birkenstocks, you just want to have a chill day. And you want to go for a little walk, right? Out over to the countryside. But you're not an idiot, right? So you grab a wagon behind you, you put all of your military gear inside. You've got your weapons, you got your armor, you got all the stuff, right? All the protective gear that you need. And you just go on a walk up and over the hills, and it's just this really nice, peaceful moment until you go over the crest of one hill, and what do you see? 5 soldiers from the enemy armor. They're in their full gear, they got their weapons, and they're pointing it right at your face. And so what do? You do one of these. You go, hey, whoa. Time out like you're an NBA game or you're Zach Morris from Saved by the Bell. That's for my millennials if you guys get that. Right, and they're like, oh, we will honor your timeout, right? And so you go to your wagon, you put on all your protective gear, you load your weapon, you get that all sorted out, and then you point it at them, and you're like, okay, now time in, and whoa, wait a second. There's 5 of us, there's only 1 of you, this isn't really fair. And some of our guys are bigger than you, and so they're like, okay, we'll send one guy who's your height, your weight, your skill set, same weapons, and then you guys can fight, right? And then we'll get this thing going. Now, of course, that's not how a war goes, right? That's not how it works at all. But what's surprising to me is how much in our life do we do that? Right? How much in our life do we think, well, we'll put the armor on when the battle is in front of us, right? When we're in the battle, we'll call time out and we'll put the armor on. That looks like this. Sometimes for some of us, it's, I'll follow Jesus. I'll put him as the priority when life starts crumbling around me or when I get older. And then when I experience the battle of life, then yeah, you can be king. But until then, I'm my king. I'll do my thing. Or maybe it's, hey, I'm gonna make church or small group. I'll make that a priority when work needs to slow down. Or maybe, hey, I'll start giving, but after I get that raise, because once I get that raise, then I can do that. Or maybe I'll serve, but I want to wait till my kids are in the ministry to serve. Until then, I'll just kind of wait. Or maybe I'll read my Bible, or I'll pray. But right now, like I haven't gotten enough sleep, so I need to prioritize that. Or I'll invite that person to church or have that conversation with them about Jesus. But I've got to read just one more book on apologetics. I got to read one more book on evangelism. And then I'll do it. Basically what we're saying is, once the battle is here, then I'll put the armor on. And we show up on the battlefield in our Birkenstock. And all of a sudden, the enemy wins. Right? We mess up or we miss out. And this is why Paul writes it this way. He doesn't say, put on the armor of God when the enemy is there or the days of evil are there. No, he says, put on your armor for when. We need to prepare. Now, here's the good news. Despite all our failures, despite all of our shortcomings, God is an incredible medic. Right? He meets us on the battlefield because we get beat up, we fail, we fall apart, and he comes and he puts us back together. We ask for forgiveness, right? He restores us, but that doesn't mean that we don't have scars. And that doesn't mean that we don't have to deal with the consequences of those moments. Right? Even though he loves us and cares for us, we still deal with the consequences. But we don't have to. And that's why Paul continues to encourage us in this way. He says in verse 13, he says, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you've done everything, to stand. Once again, what can we hold on to here? Success requires endurance. When Paul wrote this, there was a picture he was trying to convey of a Roman soldier in full armor standing his ground, protecting what was important behind him. That was the picture that Paul was trying to convey. Now, in our modern day, I can't help it. Some of you guys are going to hate me for this. I can't help but think of an NFL offensive lineman. So if you are a sports person, you are going to love this. If you are not a sports person, I appreciate you tolerating this, right? Just bearing with me. Now, if you're a real high-level football person, you're going to hate this too, because I'm not going to go far enough, and you're like, oh, that doesn't quite make sense, all those types of things. But just get this visual. Right, even if you just popped on football for 10 seconds, you know those guys protecting the quarterback, they are massive human beings. They're tall and they're big and they're strong, and they have been trained to do one single thing: protect what's important behind me. That's what they do. As I got that visual, I started thinking, what am I protecting behind me? Right? Why is this important? Why do I need to put on the armor? What am I protecting? Well, for me, it's my wife. It's my kids. It's my relationship with Christ. It's this church and the people within it, right? I'm digging my heels and I'm pushing back. And maybe as you're thinking about yourself, you're thinking, well, who's that for me? Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a job, maybe it's finance, maybe it's a house, maybe it's a reputation. And you're pushing back, trying to protect those things. In fact, maybe as you're doing this mental exercise, you're actually realizing, oh, and I'm spending a lot of energy pushing back, trying to protect things that honestly don't really matter. And I'm missing out protecting things that actually do. But the reason I want you guys to get that visual picture is I want you to burn those things that really matter into your mind. Because when you realize what you're protecting, that's when you get that endurance to keep pushing and pushing and pushing, because you cannot imagine the things that you're protecting falling victim to the enemy and falling apart. You know, sometimes in life, it feels like this. It feels like there's a 400-pound defensive lineman pushing against you, trying to destroy what's behind you. But sometimes in life, it just feels easy. In fact, when it's easy, that's also a strategy. Because in football, sometimes if you're the defensive lineman and you're trying to push back past the offensive player, what you do is you'll back off. And maybe you'll try to pick off an interception or back off just to get them to let down their guard. And all of a sudden they stand up, and as soon as you stand up, you just go charging over because they're easy to knock over at that point in time. You know, the reality is Satan uses this technique too. And many of you have learned this the hard way. In seasons of ease, that's when Satan waits till you take down the armor, you stand up tall, you're off balance, and he charges in. And we see this all the time in life. Like, think of the Hollywood people that you watch on TV, you think they have everything together. They're beautiful, they're married to beautiful people, they have all this money, they get to do this dream job. But all of a sudden, their life falls apart. Why does that happen? How do they go bankrupt? How do they get divorced? How do they have these suicidal thoughts or even commit suicide? It doesn't really make sense to us because life is easy and you let down your guard. How do we read about these big name pastors? I mean, they have thousands of people who listen to them. They have all of this influence. They write all of these books, and all of a sudden they have an affair and it blows up their church. How does this happen? Because when life is easy, guess what happens? We take off our armor. Everything's good. And that's when Satan charges in. And the same will be true for you too. Right now, if life is easy, stay on guard, because that's when Satan will strike. But here's another challenging truth for you, maybe for some of you. If life has been easy for a long time, and you've never felt that pressure or that attack, it's possible that Satan is not seeing you as somebody worth attacking. And that's a tough thing to hear. If life has been easy for a long time, it's time to lean back in and say, God, what do you want me to do? Because I'm telling you that when you are in line with Christ, when you're doing what he wants you to do, you will feel that attack. Here's where Paul goes next. He says in verse 14, stand firm then with the belt of truth tucked around your waist. Here's what I want you to hold on to. Here's the key takeaway of what Paul is saying is success requires truth. Now Paul was a Roman citizen. He lived in lands that were occupied by Rome. Because of his faith, he spent a lot of time in jail. And he could just probably had hours just staring at these soldiers in their full body armor. And this is where this analogy comes from, right? He's seeing it, he's writing, he's thinking through how Christ works in life, and he looks at the belt. Now, the belt is a fascinating thing when it comes to a Roman soldier. It was incredibly important, and not even for the reasons that you probably think. The belt was how you saw the rank of the soldier, how important they were. It also held their weapons, so they had all of their gear right at their side. In fact, in that culture, if you lost your belt or you were defeated and someone took your belt, that was like the ultimate humiliation. It was even illegal in that culture to wear someone's belt if you didn't have that proper rank or if you weren't that person. So why did Paul start here? I mean, why did he start with truth? He could have talked about any of these things. And why did he start with the belt? He could have used any of these parts of the armor first. Why does he do this? Because he realized that just like the belt, there's nothing more important than truth. Because everything in life hangs on the belt of truth. No pun intended, like the weapons hanging on there. And if you don't wear the belt of truth, guess what? You get caught with your pants down, which is a total pun intended, by the way. For some of you guys, you're gonna get that later. Have your mom explain it to you, I guess. But here's where I agree with Paul, is that I agree that there's nothing more important than truth. In fact, if you spend some time with me for whatever reason, you're gonna learn this really quick. Because every time that I sit down with a couple and I'm preparing them for marriage, one of the things I do is I pull out a deck of cards and I say, hey, I wanna play a game of poker with you. And so I'll sit them at the table, I'll deal out 5 cards to the future husband, the future wife, myself. And I said, here's what I wanna do though. Most people in marriage, they play poker like we all play poker, right? You keep the cards to yourself, you don't show your cards. I said, but I want you guys to play the most boring game of poker possible. in your marriage. I want you to flip the cards over. Because when you flip the cards over, yeah, it's a boring game, but you know exactly what to do, right? You know who has the high hand. In fact, in a marriage, I say, look, what you can do, you can take your hand, you can combine them and make an even better hand. And then you can play all of the cards that you have against the world that's trying to tear you apart. My hope is that they start laying over the cards of truth, and this is who I am, and this is what's going on, and this is what I'm feeling, because that's going to allow them to navigate marriage. If you work with me, you don't avoid this either, right? Truth is very important to me, and I'll say this over and over and over again. I'll say something to the effect of, hey, tell me the truth because I can't do anything with a lie, right? Because if I know the truth, I know how to respond. And if I'm thinking something that's not true, guess what? I'm gonna make the wrong decision. My kids don't escape me either. We have 4 rules in our house. The first one is do your best and let the results come. Because I don't want them to think that winning is the most important thing. Actually, development is the most important thing. So I always tell them, hey, do your best. I always say, hey, we only fight to protect others. Typically, I yell this at them when they're fighting each other, right? We only fight to protect others. And then I say, hey, we only cry for 3 reasons. And for some of you, this is the big takeaway that you'll get, right? We only cry if someone dies. We only cry if we're seriously hurt. And we only cry if the Vikings lose. Those are our 3 options. Now, yesterday, hey, the Vikings won, right? So we didn't have to cry. It was a great day in the Anderson household. But here's the 4th one, and this is the most important, is I always tell my kids, hey, there's nothing worse you can do than lie. Why is that so important? Because if we understand our enemy and we read and learn about our enemy, we learn very quickly that Satan is called the father of lies. In fact, lying is his native language. And why does he lie? Well, the Bible tells us to steal, kill, and destroy. And when we lie, and when we don't speak the truth, when we know we should, we speak his language. I was chatting with my wife just before I came up here, and I said, hey, I have a story I'd like to tell. Can I tell it? She said, no. So I want to tell you a story about my friend. I have this friend, and sometimes this friend's wife will buy stuff on Amazon, clothes. Now, the trouble with buying clothes on Amazon is you don't see them until they show up, right? So sometimes my friend, his wife will then put on the new Amazon clothes and will say, does this look good? And now my friend, he is in trouble, right? Because depending on how he responds, this could ruin his day, might ruin his life. But he is beholden to the truth. And sometimes he has to say, hey, that shirt that you bought on Amazon looks like the puffy pirate shirt from Seinfeld, if we have any Seinfeld fans in here. If we don't, look it up, you'll understand, and say, you cannot wear that in public. That's gonna embarrass me, it's gonna embarrass you, it's gonna ruin our family's reputation, right? The takeaway is this: sometimes we have to speak the truth. It's not to hurt people, it's because we love people. And if we really love somebody, we have to tell them the truth. Also, when we lie, or when we believe a lie, we are wounded and we wound those around us. When I meet with couples, a lot of couples in our modern day, I'll say, hey, what's your living situation? They say, we're living together. And I normally stop them and say, hey, I understand why you're doing that. I get it. It actually kind of makes sense, right? You every time you're kind of leveling up to prepare for the ultimate goal of marriage, right? You go on that first date, and then you're like, this is the only people you're dating, and then you get engaged, and then the next logical step, I get it, is to live together. But what's interesting about the Bible is it speaks of sexual purity, right? Not sleeping with people before marriage and putting yourself in that situation. You know, it's kind of natural. It's like, hey, this goes hand in hand. And so I always tell them, I said, you know what? Like, I can see where that would make sense. Like, you're preparing yourself for this long-term marriage, but that's not what God's truth tells us to do. And then I normally share something with them that always is a corollary, is that the data shows time and time again that God's truth is truth. I'll say, you probably don't know this, but couples who live together before they're married have a 48% chance, or they're 48% more likely to get divorced. You see, when we buy into a lie, it wounds ourselves and it wounds those around us. Now we look at the enemy. How does he do this? Right? How does he use lies? Well, we see it right away at the beginning of the book, right in the book of Genesis. We have Adam and Eve, and he twists this truth. He says, did God really say that? Did God really say that you can't have that fruit? Then later on, he just blatantly lies and says, hey, you will not surely die if you eat this. Both these are lies. This is what Satan does, right? He twists truth. He just blatantly speaks the truth. Sometimes I'll hear it when I'm talking with people. They'll say something to the effect of like, truth is under assault. And I normally think, sometimes I'll say, I think truth has always been under assault. It just looks different in every different generation. Like right now, where I see it, where I experience is this postmodern secular philosophy. In fact, when I went to college, it was definitely this. I went to a state school, sat in my first sociology class, and the teacher said, I'm a Christian. He's talking about himself, like, I'm a Christian, but not because I believe in Jesus, it's because of how I was raised. Like I was raised in the church, I'm white, I'm American, and so you tend to be a Christian. Then he went on to say, if I was born someplace else, maybe I looked different, had different parents, different culture, I would probably believe that. And his point where he was really driving to at the end was, he was trying to get us as freshmen in college to buy into this idea that because of where he was raised or all these types of truth that he was taught, that truth was subjective. That's where he was trying to get us to, is that truth is relative, and ultimately there can be no real truth. And this shook me, guys. I mean, he's got a PhD, he's really smart, and I went back to my dorm room and I just thought about this. I thought, wait a second. He's saying that truth is subjective by making an objective statement. And then I thought, you know what? Just because someone else doesn't think like me, act like me, we're raised in a different culture, doesn't mean that all cultures, all teachings, all religions are wrong. Right? None of it made sense, but that's what this world does, right? It tries to confuse us. In fact, some churches even bought into this. Because if truth is relative, then the Bible is relative. And then if the Bible is relative, then I'll let it say whatever I want it to say. I'll pick and choose as I want. And therefore, they just make their own truth. Or online, how many times have you guys seen this? There's misinformation or disinformation. I don't know about you guys, but every time I go on Facebook, which is very rare, for some reason there is an article, I don't know why it's targeting me, tell me about how Morgan Freeman has died. Facebook thinks I'm really interested in Morgan Freeman. Now, I'm pretty sure, unless something has changed this morning, Morgan Freeman is still alive, but for some reason, there's article upon article about telling us Morgan Freeman has died. Like our world is saturated with disinformation, where you read something and you have to start with this feeling of like, I don't trust this, I have to research this to find out if it's true. Or sometimes online, there'll be this, what I call algorithmic truth, where I read something that I want to be true, and then it realizes I'm reading something like that, and then the next article, and the next article, and the next article, and the next article. And it takes me down this rabbit trail, and now I'm buying into a lie because it started with something I wanted to be true, and then someone, to get clicks or money, wrote articles that they knew that somebody wanted to be true, and then here we are. As I was preparing for today, I felt very much under attack. I don't know why. This is just a challenging week for me to write and process and prepare for this moment. In fact, it was all the way until late last night that I was still feeling that. Even this morning, I was feeling that. So last night I went down to pray with my daughter before bed. And she says, Dad, how you doing? I said, to be honest, I'm not doing great. I'm really struggling with what I'm gonna say tomorrow. And she said, what is the core thing that you're trying to say? I said, well, I'm talking about the belt of truth. And she's like, oh yeah, I remember I went to this class and we learned about the belt of truth. And she said, well, what are you trying to say? I'm like, I want people to understand how important truth is. And she looks at me and she says, well, Dad, you know what you have to tell them. I said, what do I need to tell them? She said, There's nothing worse you can do than lie. Now, why do I tell my kids that? Because when we lie to one another, we break trust with one another, right? You don't trust people who lie to you. You don't want to be around them. You don't believe a word they say, right? It breaks trust. But also when we lie to each other, when we buy into a lie, and we operate in a completely wrong way. Our biggest wounds in life will happen because we believe a lie and we live in that lie. Instead, what does God tell us to do? To put that belt of truth around, to stand guard, to push back, to protect what's important behind us. It guards ourselves, it guards them, and ultimately, what does a good offensive lineman do? They push forward towards the goal. And they bring their truth everywhere they go. To their friends, to their family, to their schools, to their work, to their cities, and it changes absolutely everything. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this time to just wrestle with this challenging topic of the belt of truth and how important that is and how we cling to truth. We just know what to do. And Lord, my prayer for everyone in this room, everyone watching online this week, is that they will dig into your word, your truth, and reorient everything in their life around it. Because Lord, when we know the truth, we know what to do. Lord, we pray this in Christ's mighty name. Amen.